Yo, I'm Yovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another Lakers postgame reaction show. I just got back from Capital One Arena here in Washington, D.C., where the Lakers just beat the Washington Wizards 125-120 to wrap up their six-game road trip with a 5-1 record and improve to 44-33. And for those keeping track at home, 44 wins is one more than last season. So the Lakers, despite having 5 games remaining in the season, have already surpassed last season's win total, yet are still somehow in 9th place in the West right now. And it's really incredible. They're 20-8 over the last 2 months, which is the second best record in the West, the third best record in the league overall, behind just the Boston Celtics and the Denver Nuggets, the two best teams unequivocally in the NBA right now. Lakers are right there at number 3, and yet they have not moved in the standings over the past couple months. But a successful road trip for the Lakers. I will touch on it more in one of my takeaways from tonight's game. You guys know the drill. Let's dig into some of the box score numbers and provide some context. So again, LA won 125-120. Anthony Davis had 35 points and 18 rebounds. He had 19 points and 8 rebounds in the first quarter. Absolutely dominated the Wizards' small front line. And we've seen this from AD countless times this season. When he plays a lottery team or a smaller front line or a lottery team with a smaller front line, he absolutely dominates them as he did tonight. So again, 35 points, 10 of 17 shooting, was very efficient, hit a couple jumpers, 15 of 15 at the free throw line. The Wizards could not keep him away from the rim, and all they could do was foul him. But 15 of 15 at the free throw line is very impressive. 2 steals, 3 blocks. So another dominant game for AD against the Wizards. LeBron had 25 points, 7 rebounds, and 9 assists, and made some big plays down the stretch because the Lakers were down big early, then they built a big lead, then the Wizards made a run, then they built another big lead, and LeBron really led the charge in the fourth quarter once LA started to figure out Washington's zone. He had one play where he caught the ball near the nail and spun and dunked, and that was really a momentum-changing play, but had some nice passes to AD, had some nice driving kicks, and again, led the team with 9 assists. No one else had more than 4. That was Austin Reeves. Rui had 19 points, 7 rebounds, so that was his 4th good rebounding performance of the road trip. He had another game with 4 rebounds, another game with 0 rebounds, but 4 of the 6 were 7+ for Rui, which is what you want to see from him. Austin, 16 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. And D'Lo had 18 points, made 4 threes. So the starters continue to carry the bulk of the scoring load. Bench only had 12 points tonight. So some quick math, 113 points from starters, 113 of the 125. And one of the more interesting numbers was, plus minus doesn't always tell the full story, but in the 38 minutes that AD played, the Lakers were plus 29. In the 9 minutes and 52 seconds that Jackson Hayes played, the Lakers were minus 24. Those bench units with Jackson at the 5 really struggled tonight. It was uncharacteristic given how well Jackson has played recently, but he didn't have a rebound tonight, had just 3 points, and just didn't have his typical effort and urgency that he's been pretty consistent with in recent weeks. Taurean Prince had 5 points, but 7 rebounds in his 16 minutes, so he was tied for second in the team in rebounding with LeBron and Rui behind AD. But did so in almost half the minutes of Rui and about a third of the minutes of LeBron. So Taurean has been rebounding the ball better, and I think the Lakers have settled into a more appropriate role for him. Spencer Dinwiddie was quiet in his 19 minutes, 1 for 4 shooting, only 4 points. Gabe Vincent played in his second game since his return, went scoreless, only took 1 shot in 14 minutes. And Max Christie had a cameo in the first half. Ended up playing the final 3 minutes of the first quarter. I thought was going to potentially be in the rotation. LA ended up playing technically like 10 guys through the competitive portion of the game. Cam Reddish was a healthy scratch, so I thought Max was going to get a chance, but it ended up just being that 3-minute stretch. Overall, LA shot 50.5%. They struggled from beyond the arc, just made 8 of 28 threes, 28.6%. So an off night from there, but did make 25 of their 29 free throw attempts. Again, AD 15 for 15, LeBron 7 for 9. So they just really pounded the Wizards in the paint, and they had no choice but to foul the Lakers. LA won the rebounding battle battle, 49-39. Did have a lower assist night than we've been accustomed to lately. Only 21 assists in comparison with 16 turnovers. So that's almost a 1-to-1 ratio, which you don't want to see. Washington dominated transition 34-17, which is partly what kept them in this game. Before we start, I just want to give a quick shout out to a few Laker fans who stopped me at the game tonight. I just want to say thank you to Rich, to John. I didn't catch everyone's name, but those are two of the people that I was able to briefly chat with. And it's really cool to be stopped by you guys. When I get stopped by Laker fans recently, I listen to your podcasts, I watch you on YouTube, and that's just been really cool for me to hear and hear the feedback and know that you guys are rocking with the show, with the podcast, with the channel. I'm continuing to build this all out, but I'm doing it hopefully to inform and entertain you guys, bring you a bit behind the scenes, keep you up to date with what's going on with the team. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are enjoying it. And if you ever see me on the street or at a game, at an event, please stop me, say hi. I love talking and interacting with Laker fans, especially if you are a fan of the show, of my channel, the podcast, any and all of those things. It means a lot to me, and I would love to stop, chat, take a picture, whatever. I'm humbled by the support and the feedback, and I can't thank you guys enough and tell you how much I appreciate it. Now, with all that said, let's get into our 3 takeaways from tonight's game. Takeaway number 1 is this was a successful road trip. The Lakers went 5-1, only losing to Indiana, and have now won 9 of 10 games overall. They're playing some of their best basketball yet again at the most crucial point of the season, entering the play-in and potentially the playoffs with as much momentum as arguably any team in the league right now. And look, I think we have to acknowledge that this was a relatively easy road trip from an opponent perspective. 4 of the teams are lottery teams, with those being Memphis, Brooklyn, Toronto, and Washington. In the case of Memphis, Toronto, and Washington, those have been 3 of the worst teams in the league for a majority of the season. Brooklyn has tailed off after an impressive start to the season. They also had a coach firing. So 4 of these teams on paper, with the way that the Lakers have been playing and with their ambitions and how seriously they have to take every game at this point in the season, those should have been shoo-in locks. And they were. The Lakers took care of business in all 4 games. And Memphis, Brooklyn, and Toronto were all double-digit wins. Those were all convincing wins. This Washington one was the shakiest one, although LA did hold double-digit leads for large portions of this game and then kind of tricked it away at the end, which I'll get into a little bit later. But from that perspective, LA dominated the lottery-level teams that they played, which is all you can do on a road trip. Also, LA opened this road trip at just 12-20 on the road, which was the worst road record of the top 11 teams in the West. So the fact that they just reeled off a stretch with 5 out of 6 wins is impressive, regardless of the level of opponent. Then, of course, they split the games against the good teams, Milwaukee and Indiana, beating Milwaukee yet again without LeBron James, this time going to double overtime, and then losing to Indiana in one of their worst shooting performances of the season. I didn't know these numbers until after I did my post-game reaction, but their 4th worst field goal percentage of the season in that game, and their 2nd worst 3-point percentage of that game. So yes, there were some defensive concerns, and particularly in transition and just allowing dribble penetration and driving kicks and whatnot. But a big reason why they lost that game was simply they just didn't make shots. They had a bunch of good looks that didn't fall, and it was one of their worst shooting performances of the season. And Indiana deserves some level of credit for that, but part of it was just 3rd game in 4 nights, a tough road environment, and LA just having an off night. But again, LA going 5-1 on this road trip is an undeniable success. My prediction had been 4-2. I thought they'd beat one of Milwaukee and Indiana and then lose to one of the lottery teams, just not take it seriously. And there were some moments where it looked like it looked possible. Both the Toronto and Washington games got off to similar starts, with the home team building an early lead before LA quickly rallied. But as I said before the trip, this was a show-me-something trip. I wanted to see if the Lakers could lock in for 10 days on the road and not only beat some good teams on the road, but also beat some lesser teams that had played them well in LA. Remember, Memphis beat them in LA. Toronto and Washington, both of those games went down to the wire. Washington actually went to overtime. So these teams had prior success against LA, yet LA took care of business. So the final 5 games are a home back-to-back against Cleveland and Minnesota. And then they play Golden State, which is a game that could determine the number 9 seed, or if either one of those teams is able to jump up to number 8. And then they close the season out on the road at Memphis and then at New Orleans, which has also become a sneakily important game with New Orleans losing tonight, and now all of a sudden potentially being a play-in opponent that the Lakers could face. So there's a lot of moving parts in the West right now, but one of the few constants has been the Lakers playing really good basketball over the stretch. It hasn't been the most difficult stretch in terms of road games, in terms of opponents, but all LA can do is play the teams in front of them. They've done that. They've taken care of business for the most part. There have been some disappointing losses. Denver a couple times, Sacramento a couple times, the Golden State game because AD got injured. But aside from some of those bumps in the road, they have some notable wins, like beating the Thunder, that fourth quarter comeback against the Clippers, beating the Bucks twice, beating the Pacers. They've amassed a solid stretch here with some pretty good wins. And unfortunately for the Lakers, it has not been reflected in the standings, but the West is just brutal. All the playoff and play-in teams continue to win at a similar clip. This is all to say that the next 11 days for the Lakers, which is all that's left in the regular season, are going to be fascinating. LA can realistically finish anywhere from 7th to 10th at this point, and that's a huge difference. It's looking more like LA is going to be 8 or 9, depending on what happens with Phoenix, Sacramento, and New Orleans. So a critical stretch coming up with every game increasing in importance. Takeaway number 2 is unserious. And that is how I'm going to characterize the final 121 of this game. So again, the context of this game is Washington hits a bunch of threes early. They get out to a 19-8 start. LA responds with a 31-10 run to close the first quarter. The teams basically trade baskets in the second quarter. LA's up by 7 at halftime. LA gains some distance going into the fourth quarter. They're up by 15. Then Washington starts the fourth quarter on a 15-2 run to get within 2. Then with their starters and closers back in, LA outscored Washington 22-13 over the next few minutes to essentially seal the game. And the third string guys check in with a minute 21 left. LA's up by 11, and they just completely collapse. They stop running their offense. The Wizards get a layup and back-to-back threes. All of a sudden, it's a 5-point game. So Maxwell Lewis has a turnover with 17 seconds left. Wizards call timeout. It's their ball, down 5. LA subs back in. LeBron, AD, Rui, and Austin alongside Spencer to close defensively. AD gets a block on a 3. LA secures the rebound, and they win the game by 5. But a running joke on the Lakers beat is the word unserious, and this is kind of an inside joke with us. We use it to describe different things, but it was never more applicable than that final 81 seconds of the game. And we've seen this throughout the season where LA's third string and really we've seen this throughout this trip where they tricked away the lead in the Brooklyn game. They tricked it away a little bit against Memphis. They tricked it away against Toronto. I think it went from like a 31 or 33 point lead down to 17 at the end of the Raptors game. So they're like one of the worst third string units in the league where they don't run any offense. It's a lot of swinging the ball around the perimeter, running out the clock, and then ISOing for contested jumpers and not playing much defense, and teams just being able to get back into games. And this is, I want to say off the top of my head, this is like the second or third time this season that this has happened, that the starters have had to re-enter a game because the third string or even the second string, like 2.5 string, whatever, wasn't able to close out a game. Overall, there were some trends to this. It wasn't just that final 121. Again, I look at fast break points. LA gave up 34 points in transition to Washington. That is way too many. Anything above 20 is pretty bad, but 34, I didn't look it up, but it would have to be one of the highest numbers LA has given up all season. And look, it was the final game of a 6-game trip. LA's been on the road for 10 days. LeBron was talking about in post-game how he can't wait to go back to LA to just be in his house, to be with his family. I'm feeling it. I don't know if you guys, I need to do a time lapse from my first post-game reaction video of this trip to now. I feel like I got bags under my eyes. I'm not as coherent as I was to start the trip. I'm sleep deprived. I have not adjusted to Eastern time zone. I'm still on Pacific time zone. So I've been going to bed between 3 and 5 a.m. every night. So I'm ready to get back to LA and sleep all day Thursday and just chill and relax and recover. I can only imagine what the Lakers are going through, having to exert themselves physically, playing on the second night of a back-to-back, third game in 4 nights. Some of that stuff is excusable, but against a team this bad who was also on the second night of a back-to-back, granted they were on the second night of a homestand back-to-back, I still think some of the things I talked about in Toronto about the Lakers' inability to contain dribble penetration, driving kicks, transition, all those things have been constant problems. And they've been bigger issues against teams like Denver and Sacramento and Boston and some of the more notable losses that they've had this season. And those are some areas I'm going to continue to monitor over the next few games and entering the play-in, entering potentially the playoffs, just to see how LA tries to combat and address some of those things. Because if we're looking at a weakness for the Lakers or one of several weaknesses for the Lakers and one of the ways that they could lose potentially in the play-in or in a playoff series, I look at transition points, I look at turnovers, I look at offensive rebounding. This isn't to take away anything from the win. I thought given the circumstances, it was solid. And I think the final score doesn't reflect the actual margin. Like if LA just kept their starters in, they probably win this by double digits. But that ending was embarrassing. And there were some embarrassing defensive stretches, particularly the beginning of the game, part of the second quarter, and the beginning of the fourth quarter. There's always ways that the Lakers can improve. And I think it continues to be the defense and them allowing teams to just get downhill and either score in the paint, create open threes out of driving kicks, and score in transition. And finally, takeaway number 3 is we got a Jarred Vanderbilt update, and I have some additional information. So we've seen Jarred Vanderbilt do some on-court work on this trip. He did so in Brooklyn, and again tonight was going through some dribbling with Phil Handy, some finishing, some three-point shooting, just kind of moving around the court. And we spoke with Darvin Ham pregame, and he said that Jarred Vanderbilt is set to be reevaluated early next week. Now, that would rule him out for Saturday's game against Cleveland and Sunday's game against Minnesota, and then potentially Tuesday's game against Golden State, depending on when exactly the reevaluation is. Is it Monday? Is it Tuesday? What's his progress like over the next few days? So on the one hand, it is a good sign that Vando has been on the court and that he is set to be reevaluated early next week. But from what I've been told, he has not done any significant conditioning and he has not done any contact portion of practice yet. So those are a couple of hurdles he's going to have to clear before being able to return to the floor. So looking at the Lakers schedule again, they play Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Friday, Sunday. So there's a little bit of a gap there. If he doesn't play on the homestand, there is a couple days in between the next game in Memphis on Friday and then that game in New Orleans on Sunday. There's only 5 games left, and it looks like Vando is going to be ruled out for at least 2 of them, if not 3. And for those who had tuned into my live stream last week, I had heard that next week might be a possibility for Vando, which is why I mentioned him potentially returning on the homestand. That's now looking unlikely, and the more likely scenario is looking like either returning in one of those final road games or potentially the play-in, or even potentially at some point during the first round. Still a lack of clarity with Vando. We might get a more concrete update early next week. Based on the Lakers' track record this season with injury updates, that's not how things have played out. But with Vando set to be reevaluated after a couple more games and still not yet returning to full conditioning or full contact yet, it does seem like he's at least another week or so away, and that might be more on the optimistic end. I don't know at this point if he's going to return before the end of the regular season. I've been told that's not off the table, and that obviously the longer the season goes, the more likely he is going to return. It could be Memphis or New Orleans. It could be in one of the 2 potential playing games, or it could be in the first round of the playoffs. Again, I'm updating you guys in real time as I hear different information and talk to different people. But again, from what I've been told, Vando is progressing well. There's just a couple more hurdles he has to clear. And I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that by the end of the regular season. We'll see, right? It's like hopefully we get an update Monday or Tuesday of next week. We have a more solid idea of what his return to action is actually going to look like. But some positive signs with him being set to be reevaluated, him being on the court, him continuing to be around the team. He was with the team for the full road trip. But again, I've heard he has a couple more hurdles to clear, and it's looking more like end of regular season is optimistic, and it might just end up being play-in or first round, and just depend on how long the Lakers season goes. But that'll do it for tonight's show. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those on YouTube, please consider subscribing to my channel, hitting that notification bell, dropping a comment, or liking this video. And for those on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast platform of choice, please consider following, downloading, and leaving a 5-star review. I'll be back on Friday with episode 10 of Buha's Block with a special guest. I'll talk to you soon.